In The Wizard of Oz, we follow Dorothy, a girl who dreams of being anywhere except her home. When we meet her at her farmhouse in Kansas, it's literally without color. It's dull, it's boring, it's repetitive, it's restrictive. Dorothy sings that famous song, Somewhere Over the Rainbow, in which she fantasizes about escaping to some place where the skies are always blue. Then she gets her wish. She's swept off to the land of Oz in a tornado. Oz is a colorful, magical, emotionally intense world full of novelty and possibility. It's the embodiment of fantasy and wonder, everything she sang about in her song. But what Dorothy gradually discovers is that Oz is also unstable, dangerous, performative, and emotionally hollow. Every companion Dorothy meets on her journey through Oz is seeking something, but what they don't realize is they all already have what they're seeking. The Scarecrow already thinks, the Tin Man already feels, the Lion already acts courageously. Likewise, Dorothy already possessed the thing she was looking for emotionally before she left Kansas. When she meets the Wizard of Oz and realizes he's a fraud and he can't send her home, she starts breaking down in tears. But the Good Witch appears and tells Dorothy she's had the power to go home the entire time. She tells Dorothy if she wants to go home, all she has to do is click her heels and say the magic words.
There's no place like home. There's no place like home.
But hold on, there are places like home. There's probably thousands of little farmhouses in Kansas, with bedrooms, kitchens, fences, families, dogs, exactly like the one Dorothy left. All those places are extraordinarily similar to her house, so it's not necessarily true that there are no places like home. So why does this not cause confusion? Why do we all instinctively know exactly what she means? Why isn't this a huge plot hole in The Wizard of Oz? Maybe Dorothy does mean there's no place like home in a literal way. Maybe she's just under the impression that there are no physical houses structurally similar to hers. Maybe she's just a confused, delirious girl making incoherent assertions. How do we know? What's going on, guys? My name's Nick. I'm the creator of Lengualytics and a fluent speaker of the Spanish language. That question, how do we know what Dorothy means, is at the heart of what most people miss about learning a language. When we learn a language, we tend to focus on the most visible parts, the words and grammar, the stuff that's obviously in front of us. But is the stuff that's immediately visible to us really the stuff that allows us to have deep implicit understanding? The answer is no. Most people get stuck in a language because they want to collect all the pieces, but they don't realize that words and grammar are actually impotent on their own. When Dorothy says there's no place like home, almost none of the meaning comes from the words themselves. The meaning mostly comes from the story around the words and the associations behind the words that we implicitly understand. Before Dorothy finishes her sentence, there's no place like, we already have a good idea of what she's going to say. We know she's not going to say Oz. We know she's not going to say Las Vegas. We know she's going to say something like Kansas or something like home. We watched Kansas become something she wanted to escape. We watched Oz become the fantasy version of everything she thought she wanted. We watched that fantasy collapse. We watched the wizard fail her. We watched her realize that the thing she was trying to get away from was the thing she actually needed.
And I'm not going to leave here ever again. There's no place like home.
So when she says there's no place like home, that lands inside a narrative we already understand. And that's important because it means when we're listening to a sentence, we're not listening for each piece to create the meaning. We're listening to each piece to confirm what we already know. So by the time the word home arrives, we already have a really good idea of what that word is going to be. The place that Dorothy spent the whole story learning to value. The place she's been dying to return to this entire time. Home. Now let's imagine we'd never heard the word home. Would that mean that we wouldn't be able to understand the sentence? No. We'd basically understand the sentence. What would happen instead is home would soak up all the meaning the story just poured into it. We wouldn't get a dictionary definition of home. Instead, we would get the place that Dorothy aches to go back to. The safety, the family, the familiar stuff she left behind. We would get a ton of these contextual connections. And that's how we deeply and implicitly understand every word. Words shouldn't be thought as these little atoms of meaning floating around in your head. They should be thought of as portals back to all the situations and experiences you've encountered them in. Imagine you learned the word dog by looking at an image on a flashcard 1,000 times. You train your brain to think dog every time you see something that resembles that image. But if you instead hear dog 1,000 times in real life situations, you don't just connect the word dog to one image. Instead, you connect it to every context and situation that you've seen it in. You connect it to friendliness. You connect it to the idea of being a pet. You connect connect it to loyalty. You connect it to all those other concepts. So when someone says dog, that word invokes all those other connected ideas. And that's why when Dorothy says home, none of us think she means that she misses a physical building. She's saying she misses everything that home means to her. Language is fundamentally context-driven. Whether it's the story pouring in from around a word, or the word's history pouring in from behind it, the word is just where all that meaning meets. Don't think of words like building blocks, think of words as a medium or a conduit through which meaning flows. Once you understand this, you realize that language learning isn't about collecting words. It's about building a robust mental model of the language, a web of associations, narratives, and experiences that allows meaning to emerge automatically when you hear someone speak. If you measure your progress by how many words, how many rules, how many structures have you collected, then you're only measuring a small sliver of what our brains actually use to understand meaning. Without the deep implicit understanding that comes with a more complete view of what language learning is, Dorothy's home gets reduced to a physical building she often sleeps in. And she's wrong. There are many places just like her home. There's no place like home ceases to make sense. It's not that words and grammar give you only half the story, it's that words and grammar give you almost none of the story. There's only one language learning method that teaches you words through association and allows you to follow narrative no matter what level you are. Comprehensible input. By watching content you care about at a level you understand, you're not just learning grammar and vocab. You learn all the less visible skills that afford you real-time comprehension. You learn to follow narrative in another language. You learn word associations. You learn tolerance for ambiguity. You learn prediction and anticipation. You don't want a language learning method that stops working when people start speaking at a normal pace. You don't want a language learning method that makes it impossible to understand someone unless you have time to stop and do direct translations. You want the same robust method that got you fluent in your native language. You want a massive amount of input at a level you can understand. Not just immersion, not just having the language on around you, but actually learning to follow what people are saying in a different language. There's a Nelson Mandela quote that people use all the time. If you talk to a man in a language he understands, that goes to his head. If you talk to him in his own language, that goes to his heart. And I hate that quote. Not because it's wrong. For most language learners, it's completely true. If you learned a language through drilling grammar exercises and using isolated sentence fragments, then yes, your second language will be emotionally hollow. It will feel thinner. It will feel more fragile. It will feel more mechanical. It will feel like if you don't touch it for 30 days, it might all just disappear in smoke. But that's not because second languages are fundamentally different than first languages. It's because we treat second languages as second-class citizens. Spanish does speak to my heart. If you speak to me in Spanish, you're not speaking to some Spanish to English translation mechanism I spent years building in my brain. You're speaking to me. You're speaking in a language that I've lived in, a language I've had relationships in, a language I've laughed in, a language I've learned in. I've been embarrassed in Spanish. I've watched stories in Spanish. I've doom-scrolled in Spanish. Spanish means something to me because I've taken the time to build the associations. I've taken the time to follow narratives. I've put in the time to make the language emotionally real. If you want flimsy fluency, the kind of fluency that can look momentarily impressive, but you never actually feel confident or comfortable in, the kind of fluency where every exchange in the language feels like a vocab quiz, then keep studying. But if you want deep fluency, the kind that allows you to speak and understand like you do in your native language, you need comprehensible input. Dorothy says 5 words. There's no place like home. And yet those 5 words communicate the entire emotional reality of the movie. Not through advanced vocab and grammar, but through all the things that we don't see when we're trying to learn a language. Narrative, associations, the true meaning of the message. And that's 99% of what fluency is. Not cramming language mechanics using flashcards and tutoring sessions, but actual authentic experience with the language. I wanted to keep this video high level, so before I released this video, I went into depth on the 2 things we talked about here. Narrative and association. If you want to go deeper on how we actually understand words, click the video right here on the end screen, and then at the end of that video, it'll take you to the video about narrative. To get the full weight of what I'm saying, I recommend you watch both of those videos because it's going to make this video hit even harder. I will see you there.